I was saying, just like the natural world, we are also curious about the mental world. And in order to understand the mental world, we have tried to approach it from more scientific perspective. And what it means to be a science for something like psychology is that it follows the scientific principle. What makes something science is that it follows the scientific values and principles of objectivity, verifiability, openness to criticism, and so on. There is a space to ask questions. There is a space for you to ask for verification of various assertions that have been made. Whereas you go to the domain of religion, which is where things started, when we organized ourselves into societies coming from hunting gathering societies in different in our early evolutionary stage. We started asking questions about the phenomena that surround us, and the things that we feel, and the way we act uh, and approach things. We were wondering about the nature and ourselves and our place in the nature. uh, Please mute yourself. And from that curiosity, we have developed religions, the primitive religions. And in those primitive religions were attempt to answer those questions. And from then on, we have made such a great progress, and we have developed various scientific viewpoints and various ways we have taken that scientific curiosity and explored various aspects of our life. Uh, and psychology is the part of all that human curiosity that we have about ourselves as well as our world. So in this class, we'll try to go further into trying to understand the scientific basis of psychology by looking at its history. How historically psychology developed as a science, who were the major figures, what were the major currents of thoughts, what were the questions that these people were grappling with. And hopefully towards the end of the class, you will get a brief glimpse of how psychology came to be what it is now. So here are the learning objectives for today. We'll first, you'll after learning this class, you will be able to describe the precursors to the establishment of science of psychology. And as I have just mentioned, we started out with religion, but after religion, we developed the field of philosophy, and from philosophy, psychology separated itself. So you will try to understand the precursors to the establishment of the science of psychology, then identify key individuals and events in the history of psychology, develop a basic understanding of the processes of scientific development and change, then recognize the role of women, people of color, and those from the global south in the history of psychology. So let us begin. And here is the brief overview of the course, of the class. We'll first start with a brief introduction, looking at the prehistory of psychology, where it all began, what sort of questions we started asking. Then we focus on the major development that have taken place in the 19th century, which have shaped psychology, the development of physiology and psychophysics. Then we'll look at various schools of thought in psychology, and then we'll come to the contributions of women, people of color, global south in the development of psychology. And finally, we'll look at what in different ways psychology has grown now, and we'll look at psychology's family tree and various subfields that are making progress on various issues of importance in our everyday life. But just to do a warm-up exercise, uh, let us try to understand what we are talking about. What is this? What do you see? What do you see?
The flag.
National flag of
Indian
India.
flag.
Yes, Indian flag. Yes, yes. There is, I think, every one of you may be able to identify that this is an Indian flag. But I have a question. And I want you to write your answer in the chat box, just a very briefly, just a sentence, maybe not more than that. I want you to imagine that suppose you have no idea about what happened before 1950 in India. What might be the consequences? You have no idea. You are completely blank about the events before or any sort of context before 1950 in India. Write your answers in the chat box. What would you miss? What would you not understand? Would you be able to recognize the image that I have just shown you? Just reflect on those aspects. What would you miss? What would you really be lacking? Yes, some answers have started to come in. Please go on, write more. Imagine. Very good. We won't have feeling of freedom. We won't understand the true meaning of tricolor flag and emotions attached with it. We won't know about our freedom struggle. We won't maybe able to understand the value of communal harmony. We won't be able to understand the essence of freedom. The feeling of belongingness to the nation won't be there. There won't be a respect towards the nation. Uh, we won't know the struggle that people have put to make this nation what it is today. We won't know we all are one. Exactly. So yes, unity, freedom, the respect and values, understanding of who we are, meaning of central chakra, significance of chronology of color, yes, the sense of pride. Yeah, we'll be watching this class at some Guru Ashram, maybe, who knows. Yes, I think excellent, very good. Uh, so I think you get the point. You get the point that if we don't know what has happened in the past, we won't be able to make sense of the present. In the present, we feel that we are a nation. We wouldn't have this feeling without a sense of past. And it's not just about our belongingness to the nation, but the meaning, the content of what it means to be Indian. What sort of values and principles and ideals an Indian should follow. That is the piece, that is the key piece of information we would be missing. We won't have a clue who we are. And our current approach towards the liberty, towards equality, uh, towards communal harmony is shaped by the events in the past. And in any sense, even in our personal life, we learn from our mistake. If we don't know what sort of events that have happened in our own life, own personal life, we won't know who we are. When you will learn more about memory, you will learn a concept called as autobiographical memory. Most of us develop this sense of autobiographical memory, which is a sense of who we are as individuals, what sort of experiences we have gone through, what sort of background we come from, and that creates a sense of continuity for us, that yes, we started out from something and now we are moving towards something, and that is what life is. And it's the same for nation. Our nation was born in 19 towards the end of 1940s, and from then on we have just completed 75 years and we are making a progress. And in that sense, our sense of who we are is dependent on our understanding of the past. And this is why if you want to know anything, you need to look at its context, you need to look at its background, you need to look at its history. And by following the same logic, if we really want to understand what psychology is, it can't be done without understanding this history. Where did it all begin? What really happened in the past? How do we come to see psychology as a science? Because psychologists are not the only people who are talking about mind, behavior, cognition, mental processes, and other things. People have talked about these issues all the time. What exactly differentiates psychologists? And that is a question that we'll try to answer in the following conversation. Starting off, first point is that, and it's a very common statement that is made about history of psychology, and that is psychology has a short history but a long past. Now, what does it mean? Something has a short history but a long past. It means that we were wondering about the psychological phenomena since long. We were always curious about the psychological phenomena, but it is only recently that we have developed what is called as a science of psychology. And the science is a kind of an underlined word over here. We have developed a new way of looking at these things. People have looked at these things in different ways. We have developed a more sophisticated, more robust approach to understand this phenomenon. And this is what it means to have short history but long past. And let's look at the prehistory. And if you have studied natural sciences, you know everything begins with ancient Greece. Everything, even in biology, if you remember, if you are looking at your textbooks from 10th, 11th standards where biology began, might surprisingly it didn't begin with any biologist. Actually, something like biology began with philosophers. In fact, everything began, every science actually has its roots in philosophy. And the same way, psychology also has its roots in philosophy. So it began with ancient Greek philosophers, which in a way they were wondering about many phenomena, including the mental phenomena, but they were the ones, especially in the West, and we need to keep this consciousness of we are talking about West, and we are in a way talking about West in an and by while sitting in the East, and there has always been an East-West divide in this world. That is why when we'll be looking at contributions to psychology, we'll also be focusing on people who are in general considered on the periphery of psychology. So psychology in a sense is more centered in the global north, that is Europe and North America. But at the same time, psychology has developed. It's like uh, a new seed taking its becoming tree in different settings. And psychology has also taken root in places like India and other parts of the world and has grown widely. So it starts with the ancient Greek philosophers, especially philosophers like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, who have wondered a lot about these phenomena. And for hundreds of years, philosophers were asking these questions: that how do we see world? How do we make sense of the world? Is there a connection between mind and a body? And how do we confirm that what we see through our eyes is the reality? And these are all, in a sense, philosophical questions. But later on, psychologists have also addressed these questions in a different way, as we'll see. But psychology as a separate study split from philosophy during mid-19th century. But let me also emphasize one point, that philosophy also had the same sort of a history. The kind of question that philosophy asks were already asked by theologians, by the people who study religions or religious sects or religious leaders. So if you read, say, scriptures of major religions in the world, you read Gita, you read Quran, you read Bible, you see that the issue of mental life, issue of mind, is uh, deeply addressed in those teachings and discourses. But at the same time, it's not science. Philosophy wanted to have reason. Philosophy took those topics and adopted a logical approach to understand those issues, and in the same way psychology adopted a scientific approach to understand the same sort of issues and separated itself from philosophy. How did this happen? It happened because of a particular philosophical development called as empiricism. Especially philosopher like John Locke, Thomas Reid emphasized that if we want to understand our mind, we need to look at the sensory knowledge, the way our sense organs work. And in that sense, they emphasize that what we need to understand is the way our senses acquire knowledge. And for example, John Locke wondered about how do human beings learn, and one of the uh, propositions that he had made is that our minds, we come into the world with a blank mind, called as in a way, it's a blank mind in Latin called as tabula rasa, and through our experiences we gather, and our minds are in a way world writes its experiences, its perspectives on our minds. And that is one way we try to resolve this question. Philosophers try to resolve this question, but this gave, in a sense, uh, a kind of a challenge to the established understandings of those of Plato and 17th century French philosopher René Descartes, who argued that some knowledge is already inborn in humans. So whether our knowledge of ourselves is innate or is it learned is again an open question which is still not resolved. And so let me give you an illustration of how philosophers used to think and how psychologists approach the issues. For example, tell me, what do you see? Maybe you can write in the chat box. Lavi Chaudhary is asking, is psychology Indian version of yoga roughly? Now, this is again a very big misconception, because psychology, and you will learn more in terms of that, yoga does address psychological question, and other meditative practices, religions, especially Indian philosophy, addresses philosophical questions, but they are not addressing those questions from a scientific perspective. They are not conducting those scientific experiments and bringing in that sort of an openness and verifiability and those values. Whereas, but at the same time, yoga is also being addressed through scientific perspective in different traditions of psychology. We'll come to that part later. Okay, so converging rail tracks, yes, yes, yes. But do they really converge? That is a question. What we see through our eyes, is that the reality? If you have seen the tracks, you know for sure that they never converge. But when you look at this picture, you see that tracks are converging. So what is real? What is unreal? How do we know? So, and this is a clear point that empiricist philosophers were making, that what we see as reality may not be reality at all. It may just be an appearance. So you need to know more in order to understand what exactly is reality for us. So this is in scientific terms called as Ponzo illusion. Human mind judges an object size based on its background, and because of the background, we see that two lines are converging with each other, and it's just a perceptual illusion and nothing else. It's not. It is because of the way we, in a way, our perceptual system, and you will learn more about perception, sensation, memory, all these elements, all these topics you are going to learn in the coming weeks. And it is because of that scientific reason we perceive this as reality. and unless we know the process behind it, we won't know that this is not reality. So let us try to then understand important 19th century development that have shaped the philosophical questions and that have prompted psychology to separate itself from philosophy. And these questions, of course, were about the nature of the mind, nature of the knowledge, and so three investigations, in fact, in total, have prompted a serious push towards development of psychology. First is the increasing research in 19th century on physiology, where researchers were trying to understand the nervous activity provide on the basis of on empirical basis, trying to understand through experiments and through studies how our brains actually function and where is mind. So people talk a lot about mind. Where is it? Is it located in the body? How is mind connected to the body? And this is a perennial question for psychology, which they have tried to understand through different ways. Then there was development of psychophysics. Psychophysics again was an attempt to understand the relationship between mind and body, and trying to understand what exactly, how quantitatively we can actually build to make sure that that relationship works. So when is it that we identify a particular stimuli, there is a sound going on in the background, when my mind actually attends to that sound? Is there an intensity involved? Is there a limit involved in my own perceptual capacity, and so on? And these sort of questions about mind body relations that psychophysicists were interested in, and we'll see more about psychophysics in a few minutes. And third important development, which you might already be familiar with, is evolution. Before evolution, people in the West believed that God created world as it was told in the Bible. If you have read the Bible, the Genesis chapter explains that God created world in 7 days, and that was a belief that was uh, a very strong belief for centuries, until Darwin came, and Darwin then showed that this is not the way to think about the world. That world has evolved in different ways, and there have been some systematic process of natural selection that has happened, and that is how we have a world that we have in front of us. Okay. So development. Now, so let's go a little bit deeper in these developments of physiology and psychophysics. First, the nervous activity, the sensation, the brain physiology uh, was being confirmed through careful, systematic, empirical research, especially the work of Hermann Helmholtz, who tried to understand sensory system, especially speed of neural impulse, that how do cells in our brain called as neurons actually communicate with each other. Now, if you might have seen it in a documentary or somewhere, you see that there is an electricity, bioelectricity moving on from one neuron to another neuron, and you get the figure that you see here. And that is first time discovered by Helmholtz in 19th century. And that in a way prompted to think about mind and behavior and other issues in a different way. And for psychology, these benefits pointed to the possibility of elucidating the physiological basis of mental operations, that our psychology is rooted in our body. So unless we start understanding how body is related to mind, we won't be able to understand psychology. And that was a very strong argument that was made, which prompted psychology to differentiate itself from philosophy. And even in this time, I'll come to William James, who wrote first psychology textbook, and he made this precise argument about understanding biological basis. So Hermann Helmholtz, he discovered speed of neural impulse, and emphasized that senses are fallible but can still be studied. And then psychophysicists like Weber and Fechner measured relationship between the way our senses experience. So for example, one of the common psychophysical experiment would be that you are given two weights in front of you. For example, I have this wallet in my hand and I have this mouse in my hand. So how do I judge which is heavier? Is there mental category for me? Is there a threshold for me when I'm able to judge the difference between those weights, different between intensity of lights, different between speeds? And you know, when you are driving, when you are carrying out significant technological operations, you need to know how our body and how our mind works and how they are connected. So all this knowledge has in a way empowered us to pinpoint that this is what human beings are capable of, and this is what they cannot really do. So moving on and going deeply into psychophysiology, advances in physiology of brain, there was also a development in terms of what is called as phrenology. Phrenology you could see as a precursor of today's neuroscience, where now we know brain anatomy, how it functions, how various mental operations, various behaviors, emotions, and so on are located in different areas of brain, how they function, and so how everything is coordinated. We have a sophisticated knowledge now. But this all started in phrenology. Phrenology, in a sense, was not exactly a science. It kind of stood between the boundaries of science, because what it tried to do, it tried to attempt the physiological localization of mental faculties. It wasn't very robust in that sense, and it came to be criticized for, in a sense, overlooking that part. So some people do consider phrenology as somewhat uh, uh, a pseudoscience. So Tushar here is asking, what is the difference between physiology and psychology? See, in a very simply, physiology is about body. Physiology is trying to understand how various bodily systems function and how various bodily changes occur, and so on. So for example, if you remember your see early 11th 12th biology class, if you have taken, so you would know that, so the way different say the way nervous coordination work, hormonal coordination work, all this is basically part of our physiological mechanism. That is what biology study. But psychology is a combination of a word called as psyche and logos. Now psyche again is a complicated term, again a Greek word, which meant soul, which also meant mind, which also meant uh, uh, mental entities, and logos is the study. So study of mind is what psychology was understood to be earlier. But then a contemporary, most accepted definition is that psychology is the study of mental processes and behavior. That is the most accepted definition. Whereas you would distinguish it from biology, because biology is mainly focusing on bodily systems and bodily changes. Okay. So moving on from phrenology to, say, psychophysics, which we have just discussed, the major focus, as I have just mentioned, is on trying to understand this mind-body problem, and developing an understanding of the threshold. And you will learn more about psychophysics and its underpinning when you will learn more about sensation and perception. In fact, all our understanding of sensation, how we sense particular thing, when do we sense particular thing, uh, is actually has its roots in the study of psychophysics. Okay. uh, so moving on, from 19th century, from mid 19th century onwards, various schools of psychology came into being. And these schools of psychology are basically uh, these schools of psychology basically were trying to approach mind in different ways. So we will learn about various schools which were prominent in different times at different and produced different trajectories of research, and contributed to understanding of psychology. Lavi Chaudhary is asking, is it like examining the software? Again, I won't encourage you to think in terms of software and hardware, sort of a binary categories, because we are much more complex than a computer. Our minds are much more complex. Our mind can't exist without uh, its biological basis and what contributes to what extent. So there are quite a few gray zones over here. So I won't call it simply as a software, because it can be much more than that. Because if you experience anger, anger is a topic of psychological research, isn't it? But when you feel anger, your body is involved. Your body is in a way constricted. Your breathing has changed, and in a sense, your physiology is involved in experience of an emotion. So it it's not just the software part that is activated, it is much more than that. So I think we'll need to think in different categories about trying to understand relationship between mind and body, which is a perennial question. So coming to the schools of thought, from mid 19th century onwards, psychology came to hold different views about nature of the mind and the best way to study it. And uh, in addition, about the same time, the fundamental questions were raised about the definition, nature, and scope of psychology, and all the kind of question that you all are raising now. That what is it? Is it like a software? Is it like what? Is there any boundary to it? What does it really study? What sort of methods it uses? Can it really be called as a science in most concrete terms? All those sort of questions psychologists themselves were asking, and which led to a kind of a debate, discussions, dialogue across various disciplinary boundaries, and science of psychology was born. But in the sense, see, one of the things that I want you to note here is that all these people who developed psychology in from mid 19th century were not psychologists themselves. Basically, they were in a sense uh, working on different neurological function. They were working on various other aspects. Some of them were philosophers and so on, and they came together and then agreed on the idea that we need something separate from philosophy and natural science to spatially focus on the mind. And that is how different schools of thoughts have generated in psychology. So first school of thought that we should be aware of is called as structuralism. Structuralism is a school of thought that stresses uh, that the basic units of our experience and combinations in which they occur. It stresses the study of those basic units, that how our mind is structured is what they are trying to understand, how the mind is structured. What are the basic building blocks of mind? If we understand the building blocks of mind, we can shape it, we can give it a direction. And that was their main focus. And the key person in structuralist school was William Wundt. William Wundt was a physiologist, philosopher. He is often credited as father of psychology, although I don't think this is a terminology we should give, because when you say father of psychology, what about mothers? And as I will show you later on, there have been quite a few women who have contributed significantly to the development of psychology. So this is a kind of a male-centric bias when you say this person is a father of psychology. You can say a pioneer, you can say a major contributor, or in any other ways. But that sort of a bias should be avoided, especially in science, especially when we are worried about women's underrepresentation in STEM fields, and this is how that underrepresentation occurs. So one of the important things that he did, William Wundt, that developed a new approach to understanding of mind, and in a way founded first experimental psychology laboratory in 1879 in the University of Leipzig, Germany. And his main argument, just try to understand his approach. There is much more. He has written hundreds of books, and if we were to study William Wundt's contribution, it's going to take years. What we need to understand is what was his really approach, what was he thinking, what was he how was he looking at mind. His main argument was that mind should be studied objectively and scientifically. Just like the way we would say that, okay, if there is an issue, there is a problem, we should approach it scientifically. We shouldn't really be just following our faith, our just be following beliefs and just not making conjectures, but we want some empirical confirmation at the same time. And his main concern was with the in a way developing the techniques to uncover the natural laws of human mind. See, for these people at that time, so if you remember your chemistry, in chemistry we have a chart which shows where is how different elements are in a way can be categorized, and how those elements have different sorts of properties. What is it called? Anyone remember? My science is
Periodic table.
yes, yes, exactly. Periodic table. Yes. So you see, for these guys, their attempt was to develop something like a periodic table. Can we develop something like a periodic table of our mind, our mental life, so that we can specify that okay, this is what this experience is like. This is what this leads to. This is what it does, and maybe a combination of them produces something like that. So he wanted to understand the natural laws that govern human life. And let me show you wound in his laboratory, surrounded by his students and collaborators there. And at the same time, there were many labs being established in Harvard and in many other places. And this is how their setup looked like. This is how psychology is generated. I wanted you to see these pictures to know that this is a sort of an activity that has led to uh, the concepts and theories and perspectives that you will be looking at in coming weeks. See, for example, if you look to the, this comes to my left's photo, experiment with just noticeable differences of weights. So basically, this is an experiment that I was talking about, that you are given say two sets of weights and you are asked to judge, okay, which one is heavier, which one is lighter. How do you make that judgment? So the idea was to understand just noticeable difference. It is also called as Weber's law. So the idea is to develop an understanding of the threshold beyond which we are able to identify the difference of weights. If I give you a 1 kilo weight and just add 1 gram over that 1 kilo, you may not be able to identify the difference, because that is not reaching the threshold where you can sense the difference between those weights. So this is the concept of just noticeable difference. So you need to have that difference in order to reach to that threshold, so that you can sense that intensity of the sense. And it is so that sort of a threshold can be then devised for our eyes. So what exactly on the broader light spectrum our eyes are able to see, what sort of sounds we are able to hear, what our skin can experience, and so on. So all these knowledge we can derive, and this was done on the basis of these sort of scientific studies, as you are seeing in these pictures. So reaction time is another way, and it is still very well used in psychological laboratories, that how long it takes for you to complete a mental operation and respond. So I ask you to judge a color. There is a task called a Stroop task. Maybe we'll do it sometime in the tutorials. In Stroop task, you have to your reaction time is judged by engaging in an activity, and you see the roots of that sort of task is there in these early times when people were trying to understand the relationship between mind and body. And moving on, uh, structuralism, another important figure in structuralism is Edward Tishner. Tishner viewed, and in a sense, he was in a way very much indebted to William Wundt, but he kind of made some independent and important contributions. So what he emphasized was that our human conscious experience could be understood by breaking down into components. So what are those components? And he developed a technique called as introspection, where participants are invited to the laboratory and they are then asked to sense something and describe what they are experiencing inside. Introspect, look deep within, and then describe what is going on. And so Edward Tishner trained his participants and observers in that way and kind of tried to formulate some general theories based on the subject reports. So you can already see the limitations of this approach, that okay, try to understand basically the structure of the mind, but some other scholars differed strongly with this whole approach of trying to understand structure. For them, it was an absurd exercise. What's the point of looking into creating a periodic table? Can you really be able to identify elements of mind, which seems very complex and complicated entity in itself? Their argument was that instead of looking at the structure, what we should focus on is the function. What function various entities, constructs in the mind actually perform. We feel emotions. Why do we feel emotions and what role they perform in our life? We should focus on the functions rather than the structure. And this is the next school of thought that dominated psychology, called as functionalism. And one of the main figures in functionalist tradition is William James, who wrote first psychology textbook published in 1890, Principles of Psychology. And that textbook, believe me, it's still readable, it's still relevant. And see, imagine this, that you write something, you produce something today, and still after hundreds of years, people come to it and people still recognize that quality and people are still inspired by this. It takes so much depth to develop that sort of a content. So imagine like this, that somebody would make a film, say in year, somebody had made a film, say something like Mughal Azam, which has captured our imagination. We watch Mughal Azam even today, feel it's a good film. It's an entertaining film. I won't say very good and great film, but it's an entertaining film. Will I, Indian audience like Sholay? Some films have stood test of time. They captured the imagination. They inspired something like Dil Chahta Hai. It captured imagination of a new generation, which in a way was trying to transgrade boundaries of our experiences and the meaning of friendship, meaning of love, meaning of relations, and the kind of achievements and boundaries and decisions one has to make. So it's like a very different take. It's not an usual Bollywood film. It's a very different film, and it's kind of a cult film. So you see, certain things capture your imagination and tell you something very deep, and it's something in William James that is there, which captures that that understanding, that maturity of knowing mind. I think that is a text. It's a kind of old archive text, but it's still readable and immensely interesting. So what William James did is he combines physiology and philosophy to create psychology, and proposed this tradition of functionalism, which is trying to ask what mind does rather than how mind is structured. And that for William James, that was the main question. Apart from that, if we were the introduction to psychology book means this course is called as Introduction to Psychology. It is indebted to William James, who first wrote the textbook, created the topic that we are supposed to talk about, created the background, created the vocabulary, understanding, theories, and in a way started the field as a whole. So people contest when they use this sort of a kind of a adjectives like who is the founder, who is the father of psychology, quote unquote father. Okay, so some people contest that William James has contributed much more than William Wood. Who knows? That's debate is still ongoing. But moving on. See, this is all located in US, United States, and North America. We come to the Europe. You see a very different understanding of psychology being generated, especially a perspective, a different school of psychology was being developed called a Gestalt school of psychology. So what Gestalt is now, when you look at this figure, what do you see? What is it? What is it? What do you see? You see a tree, You see a tree in soil. Yes. You see tree and roots. Yes. You see a tree, deep roots of the tree. Okay, tree. We understand it is a tree, but then see, how do you derive the meaning that it is a tree? Because you have a clear representation in your mind about what is exactly called as a tree, what exactly looks like a tree. And that is what they are trying to emphasize. Gestalt psychologists said that how people perceive and experience object as whole patterns and not as different components. So you're not interested in looking at branches and leaves and roots exactly and so on. So what you are trying to do is to look at the big picture. Look at the big picture. Look at what could be the most meaningful thing to be said about this picture, and you say that. So that is what uh, Gestalt psychologists were trying to understand. The important names here are Max Wertheimer, Kurt Kofka, Wolfgang Kohler, and what they were trying to argue, and this is kind of a very famous quote from Gestalt psychologists, that the whole is different from some of its parts. So what they are saying is that when you perceive things, you do not look at its specific components, but you want to understand uh, it as a whole. So by simply combining elements, you don't get the whole, because whole is much bigger than some of its parts. Because we perceive whole differently, we derive meaning differently. So what they are arguing is that mental experience depends on patterning and organizing different elements. So here we see a tree, we just see that. We see a tree, we don't see any particular elements. And that is how we look at the world, and we look at uh, what it means in totality, what it means together as a whole, rather than as individual atomized components. Okay. So, but you see, until this time, all we are talking about is the conscious experience, the conscious mental processes, and everything in a way that we are aware of those things happening. But that is not just who we are. We also dream. We are not most of the time aware of our dreams. Our dreams are an important aspect of our mind. If we in a sense, it's very common aspect of our mind, and there are many ways. See, one of the things that people talk about mind is that it's not just uh, what is known, what is conscious, but it is also mysterious, in the sense that there are many things that we don't know about ourselves, or we don't know about the mind. And this is something that a psychologist, a very well-known psychologist. He didn't start out as a psychologist. He was in a way, neurologist, was studying the kind of a nervous functions. So uh, his name you might already have heard, uh, Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was interested in not just the conscious experience of human beings, but also the unconscious experience of human beings. And his main argument, and this is very interesting and very powerful, and still Freud is a major psychological thinker. His main argument is that our mind is as much unconscious as it is conscious. In fact, it is far more unconscious. It is submerged. So his main imagery that he used for mind was uh, of an iceberg, and we'll come to that part. So Freud is credited with proposing this concept of unconscious mind. That, and it's very influential. He's a very influential thinker. Apart from that, he is a very powerful writer. He could write really well. He and one of the interesting things about Freud is that he only did case studies, and through those case studies he developed a theory called as psychoanalysis, a perspective of psychoanalysis. At the same time, he also developed a psychotherapy which can help people deal with mental health issues. So his contribution is far wide and far deep, which in a way we need to address. He started out trying to understand various nervous disorders, and he noted that various nervous disorders are actually not an outcome of any physiological aspect, but an outcome of our mind. Maybe there are some hidden desires, hidden experiences that are prompting that sort of a biological change, physiological change. So his main proposition was that mind is like an iceberg. It is mostly hidden, and below the surface lies the unconscious mind. And you see, if you have looked at the submerged iceberg, you see that large part of the iceberg is drowned in the water. Only a small part is above the surface, and that is how Freud proposes our mind is. That most of what our mind is submerged, and we really have no conscious, no idea what it is, and it still is influential, and it is still uh, has consequences for the way we make choices, the way we behave. So unconscious mind is, as Freud has proposed, is a reservoir of mostly unacceptable thoughts, wishes, feelings, and memories. So here is a very radically kind of a different approach to the study of mind, looking at its unconscious, looking at looking at dreams. Freud was the one who looked at dreams. His book Interpretation of Dreams is very famous. He wrote about jokes and its relation to unconscious. He wrote about various. He in fact gave a theory of personality, uh, which told us how in ourselves we have different conflicts in terms of. See, there is some sort of a discussion going on in the chat box. Please pay attention to the topic that we are talking about. Uh, and whatever claim, see, one of the points that I'll make in terms of the discussion that is going on, I won't go in too deep into that, but I will just point out that whatever claim you make about mind, do it scientifically. Is there any scientific basis for what you are saying, or it is just a conjecture? Anyone can make a conjecture, but it takes some sort of a depth to make an argument based on a robust scientific basis, and that is what we need to do when we are trying to address issues like mind. Moving on, see, from unconscious, we go to a kind of a overt behavior. Next school of psychology is behaviorism, where behaviorists like B.F. Skinner, John Watson focused on what was observable, measurable, and rejected the idea that mind actually could be studied or worth the effort. They were in a way very, very strict in the sense that, okay, what can be studied? Let's not go too deep into metaphysics. Let's not go too deep into philosophical questions. What can we observe? What can we study? What is the stimulus? What is the uh, response? That is what actually is important, and that is what their viewpoint was. So emphasis among behaviorists was on the rigorous experimental investigation of overt human and animal behavior, and their ultimate goal was the prediction and control of behavior. And here you see Watson saying that if you understand the laws of mental behavior, in a sense how our the stimuli and behavior are interconnected with our mind. See, one of the things I'm seeing in the chat box is some very ridiculous sort of discussion is going on, and I can see the names. You will get noticed. Please don't do that, especially not in the class. If you have any issues, please leave the class. You're welcome to leave the class, but don't disturb others. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that there are people who are trying to focus and study and understand. If you don't need, just leave it. Let others. Don't hamper other people's progress. That's not nice. Okay, and don't do that in my class. I don't like it. So what Watson is saying, coming back to the issue, uh, is is a kind of an assertion. You see what he is saying, that give me a dozen of healthy infants, well in well formed, and my own special world to bring them up in. I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to be any type of specialist I might select, a doctor, a lawyer, artist. So what they are saying is that our behavior is shaped by various stimuli that surround us, and they can be designed, the stimuli can be designed, and behavior can be shaped. So they are emphasizing that, but of course, behaviorists were criticized for, in a way, trying to ignore the mental processes, trying to, in a way, also proposing a sort of a mechanical, machinistic sort of an approach to human behavior, because human beings have will and they can make different choices. Even if you create an artificial world for them, they will make different choices. So this was behaviorism, but they contributed one thing to the psychology, is the need of a rigorous experimental, rigorous scientific basis for making any claim about mind. Then from behaviorism, people started wondering about the mental processes, and people started thinking about, okay, what exactly is going on in mind when a stimulus is perceived and a response is given. And here comes the role of cognition. Cognition is the way we process information in our mind, the way we make judgment, the way we discriminate between things, the way we perceive things, the way we communicate things, the way we acquire information, store information. So all the topic that you are studying, attention, perception, memory, and so on, are part of what is called as cognition. And in cognitive revolution, what it denotes is moving away from behaviorism's emphasis on objectivity and focus on the on the internal mental processes that can give insight into how we process information and how we actually make sense of things, how we interpret things. So from 1950s onwards, new disciplinary initiatives, especially in linguistics, neuroscience, computer science, were emerging, and these areas revived interest in the mind as a focus of scientific inquiry, and that later led to formation of what is called as cognitive science. And in 1960s, psychologists rejected behavioristic focus and adopted what is called as cognitive approach. And this cognitive approach, which is still a dominant approach to study mind, basically looks at mental processes such as language, memory, uh, problem solving, that play a larger and more important role in understanding human behavior. So this is in a nutshell, the different schools of psychology and development of psychology across uh, centuries. But at the same time, one of the important limitations of this account is the contribution. So it is as if psychology is a science of white people. It's not the case. Psychology has been equally contributed to by women, people of color, and global south. So the only problem is that the kind of mainstream accounts that are written do not give adequate space to know about the contribution of women, people of color, and global south. Especially if you look at the work of Lita Setter Hollingworth, Mary Whitton Cocking, who was first female president of the APA. It's still one of the most important psychology organizations in the world, called as American Psychology Association. Uh, and then Karen Horney is one of the important psychoanalysts. She contributed a lot, taking from Freud. Even Freud's daughter, Anna Freud, also contributed a lot to the development of psychology. But all these stories of women taking the initiative, contributing to the knowledge, are somewhat underemphasized. So this is one way to emphasize and remember their key contribution, and what that is why they are also called as founding mothers, rather than simply the fathers of psychology. Another important aspect in the history of psychology is that psychologists were keenly also focused on using psychology for the benefit of society, and in a way trying to create an impact on society, trying to create positive social change in society. And in United States itself, in 1936, an organization was formed by psychologists called as the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues. It's called as SPICI, and it's still a very well recognized, and it's a kind of a very influential organization even today. And let me give you one example, one very important example of contribution of people of color, especially African Americans in United States. So one of the key kind of an emblematic contribution was made by this Clark couple, who were also civil rights activists, uh, uh, who worked on the self-esteem and kind of a child development within white communities and black communities. And these psychologist husband and wife showed that that the segregation of the communities, you see, until 1960s, black people or African American people have to study in separate colleges, and they can't attend the colleges that are designated for white people only. So they could not go to, say, those colleges. So if you have, say, watched film Forrest Gump, Forrest Gump is a very interesting film you should watch, which in a way coincides the story of the protagonist with the important events in American history. And one of the important events in American history is the event where a black person joined a white university first time, under the law that was changed. And the change of the law happened because of the psychological research that Clark has done. They showed that how segregation, the racial segregation and racism in itself impact negatively on the mind of the black children, and how they develop feelings of inferiority and low self-worth because of that. And that was the reason, and that was the research on the basis of which Supreme Court in United States gave this decision for ending the school segregation. The decision is very well known across the history, as called as Brown versus Board of Education. And this is one of the ways psychology has contributed to radical social change. Coming to India, you might be wondering about India as well. Where was India in all these events happening? Yes, India, in fact, in India, psychology has more than 100 years of history. First psychology laboratory in India was established in Calcutta in 1916, and postgraduate classes began the following year. Dr. N.N. Sen Gupta, who worked under Professor Hugo Munsterberg, a former student of William Wundt, and at the same time here in this the first department was established in 1916. Then subsequently psychology department were also established in Mysore in 1924, Patna in 1946. And see, in this sense, the roots of psychology are deep in India. And significantly, Girindra Shekhar Bose, who succeeded Sen Gupta as the chairman of Calcutta University Department of Psychology in 2019, was associated with Sigmund Freud and became a pioneer of psychoanalysis in India. So in that sense, psychology has its roots in India, and psychologists have contributed to development of psychology. Indians have contributed to development of psychology. In fact, first social psychology textbook was written in India in 1924. So that's how old it is. Coming to the psychology's application to Indian society, soon after independence, the entire country faced various very serious internal conflicts and other kinds of social tensions, the horrors of partition. And after the horrors of partition, the then Prime Minister Pandit Nehru invited Gardner Murphy, who was a leading social psychologist at that time, to initiate and conduct psychological studies on social tensions in India. And this is a book that you see on the right hand, In the Minds of Men, the study of human behavior and social tension conducted at the request of Government of India. And in a sense, what the In the Minds of Men is actually taking from a UNESCO document which says that the roots of our social conflicts lie in the mind. So unless you understand the dimension of mind, unless you remove prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination from mind, It is not going to be removed from the practice. And that is the basis on which the many psychological research were conducted. They are reported in this book. And this, in a sense, remained a model and source of inspiration for many Indian social psychologists for their studies on caste, national stereotype, prejudice, and other questions of national significance. Okay, so uh, this is in a way what we try to do is to capture the contributions of those who are on the periphery of psychology, uh, and also try to capture the major developments in the field of psychology. Now, finally, let's take a look at how psychology has grown these days, and let us look at the subfields of psychology and how and each development will tell you uh, how psychology is used to address different sorts of issues. So I see a question in the chat box. Uh, what do you mean by dimension of mind? I have heard this term very often, but don't know the answer. Dimensions of mind, in the sense, see what exactly is dimension? Dimension can be, in a sense, its its functions, its properties. Uh, that could be one dimension. Dimension. So your mind, in a sense, it has uh, a tendency to, so for example, how you become aware of mind, what do you experience when you think about mind? It's a kind of a stream of thought that is going on. So when William James was trying to understand mind, he gave a very particular term to address a particular dimension of mind called a stream of thought, stream of consciousness. His point was that when you talk about mind, a mind, in a sense, is like a stream. It's a dimension, it's a stream, but at the same time mind can also be very calm and stable, and in a way very content in itself, nothing flowing, nothing happening. So it can be, you can be very conscious of mind, you can also be very unconscious of what is happening, what you are thinking, how you are feeling. So all these sort of dimensions that so a dimension can also be addressed from the perspective of, say, social dimension of mind, how society, culture uh, uh, actually shapes the nature of mind. Or dimension can also be addressed from, say, what is called as a developmental perspective, that how do babies develop their mind, what how do we become aware of ourselves as beings, as conscious beings. So if you look at the developmental trajectory, you look at the social cultural trajectories, and you look at say physiological biological basis, you understand various dimensions of mind. It's a complex entity which has its roots in our body, but at the same time is also connected to what is happening around us. It's connected also to history, it's connected also to society, to culture, and so on. So this is what is meant by dimension of mind. And as you see in the subfields of psychology, various dimensions that people tried to address have created various subfields of psychology. Those who were interested, then Tanya is asking, how we came to know that we use only 1% of our brain? Is it related to the unconsciousness of mind? Actually, this is a myth. This is a class of science of psychology. We first thing we need to do is to differentiate myth from scientific fact. What is a scientific fact? Does it have a basis? I have seen, I think there is a film which in a way uses this myth, which is a kind of a ridiculous myth, that we use only 1% of mind. Who has done that studies? Where were those studies published? Because you have to, because the way scientific research work, you have seen the photos in the laboratories of early psychology laboratories. People did those work and people published in scientific journals. Those journals are still accessible to you. Whatever William James wrote in 1890s, it was published in journal Psychological Review. It's still there. That journal is still functioning. You do good research, you can still publish there and you contribute to that knowledge. Maybe you are coming from, say, different streams, different fields. You are looking at different branches of engineering. All of them will have peer-reviewed scientific journals. where key research is published, where we try and make sure that what we are focusing on is a fact and not a myth. So one of the key lessons here is to don't believe on what you hear. Always be skeptical, always be critical, look at the evidence and then make up your mind. Unless you see the evidence, don't agree with anything. Yes, the Lucy movie. Thank you for informing me. But that's a myth. So don't go in that direction. We are looking at science. We're not looking at myths. So moving on, the psychologist family tree, various subfields. For example, the fields which are focusing on biological foundations, like biological neuroscience, which tries to understand how brain, nervous system, other biological processes determine behavior. Then there are fields which try to look at the sensation, perception, learning, thinking aspects of our mind, and they have the fields like experimental psychology. For example, psychophysics, the psychophysical experiments would be categorized under experimental psychology, where we are trying to understand mind body relationship, cognitive psychology, where we are trying to understand how our minds process information, and so on. Then we want to understand the stability and change, and this is again another dimension of mind, where we try to understand the changes that occur in our behavior and our thinking over the lifespan. And also personality psychology. So are there any consistencies, are there any personal, are there any specific traits that govern the way people think about themselves, the way people make relations, the way people approach things, and so on. So personality is of course a big aspect. Then there are fields which focus on physical and mental health, like health psychology, which tries to understand relationship between psychological factors and physical ailments or disease. Clinical psychology, which tries to diagnose and treat psychological disorders. I remember some of you have asked question, what is the difference between psychiatrist and a psychologist? Psychologists can be categorized under these subdivisions, like health psychologist, clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, but they can't give you a pharmacological advice. They can't give you medicine, and that is where you basically you approach a person who has a MBBS degree and then a MD in psychiatry. That person is called as a psychiatrist. So remember this distinction between psychologist and a psychiatrist. Okay. Then there are also fields which focus on our social network. For example, how society, how other people's presence shapes our thoughts, feelings, behavior. That is focused in social psychology, which will come to in the I think to after in the month of October. Will go into some of the topics in social psychology. Then there is field of cross-cultural psychology, which tries to understand how mental processes differ according to the culture. So is there any similarity or difference according to different cultures, the way people form their self, the way people develop memories, the way people approach others, and so on. So, and there is a good deal of research which shows that the cross-cultural variation in various thinking and behavior does exist. Then there are new frontiers that are coming up, especially combining all these aspects. Clinical neuropsychology focuses on relationship between biological factors and psychological disorders. Evolutionary psychology, trying to understand how evolution has shaped particular behaviors and mental processes. Political psychology, trying to understand power relations, political phenomena, why people vote for a particular party, why people fight with each other, how people could be taught to value democracy or so on from a psychological perspective, and so on. So all these are new emerging subfields of psychology, and there are much more. There is much more. It's a dynamic, ever flowing sort of a field which is ever growing, and these are just maybe just snippets of what is there. Okay, so this is it. I'll take a few questions and then I want you to do one activity. Yes, dimension of mind addressed. Common brain imaging techniques, fMRI, yes. Can measure activity in brain while a person performing, yes, definitely. People, many psychologists use fMRI to study how various behaviors are correlated with various kind of brain activations using fMRI, and this kind of a good deal of research that is going on. What does it mean to be by using the brain, and how much brain is working? Again, kind of an unclear question. Not sure how to address that. Uh, is self-reference paradox related to psychology? Yes. See, self-reference paradox is that when you learn and when you read something in terms of any psychological process, this especially happens when you are reading something like, say, clinical psychology, when you are reading about mental disorders. One of the strange feelings that you get from mental disorders is that you also start thinking that, yeah, uh, some of those symptoms are also there in you, which is which happens because whenever you are reading something, a new symptom or something, you are linking it to your own self, and because of that self-reference effect, you come to see that you also have those sort of symptoms. uh, yeah, and of course that is why it is related to the way we perceive and the way we link things. Under which category does urging people to wear masks during COVID-19 falls? Of course, it comes under many different disciplines of psychology, especially social psychology, because it is related to behavior of a group, many people, behavior of a society, behavior of nation, and how do you convince people to behave in one particular way? How do you change their behavior? We don't normally use masks. So, but there is a threatening situation, and government has made this law that everybody needs to wear mask. How many people actually start wearing it? How do you ensure? How do you understand the psychological underpinnings of that behavior? And that is where psychology is needed. Psychology is about behavior. So, and behavior is not just one domain of activity. Behavior is everywhere. Behavior, economic behavior is, of course, very impactful for our life. This mask wearing behavior can make a life and death difference. So basically, uh, it's such a kind of an exciting area, ever growing area, and what pandemic has done. And towards the end of this course, we'll specifically look at psychology's applications to COVID pandemic. And in that topic, we'll discuss all these issues about mask wearing behavior, I think another question is that we should not have called it social distancing. We should have called it physical distancing. What are the implications of calling one or the other? We'll discuss that. And there are many more questions and many more exciting issues that we'll address. Okay. So one final thing I want you to do is to address this question. What was the muddiest point about today's class? What was it that you didn't understand? What was most unclear? Let's address that in the next 5 minutes, and I'll try to uh, address that muddiest point in the remaining last 5 minutes. Okay, so uh, I'll just copy this link to the chat box. Okay, and I want you to write the muddiest point of today's class. Okay, just click the link and write your answer. What is it that you didn't understand? A single word, maybe a concept, anything that was unanswered, because for these many students, I think this is important, that if there was something that was unclear, that was not elaborated enough, we'll address that. Let me share that word cloud so that you all can see what you all are writing. Okay, good, good. Please write. Just have 1 minute left. One final minute, please. Write fast. So one question that I see being asked in the chat is that from where do we study the content? Do you, I think you already have access to the outline of the course, and each topic has a link embedded in it. So you just click on that topic and it will lead you to that specific reading for that specific class. Okay. And for, can we get that PDF from which you are teaching? Definitely. If you look at the course outline, it's already been shared with you, isn't it? So you will find a link there from which you can download the topic, download the PDF. We have created that specific PDF for this class only. So it has all the topics that we are talking about very lucidly, very simply uh, discussed, and one of the best textbook on. Yes, it's on Moodle. I can also paste the link over here. Please, you have one final minute. Please write down what do you think is the muddiest point. Meanwhile, I'll just share the outline. Okay. Yes. So here is the outline, and all the links are there. If you go there, PDF is there. Uh, Reading material, online PDF version of the textbook is available, and you can download it. Yeah, so people are asking पेपर में क्या आएगा? अब जो आएगा वो आप पेपर में ही देखेंगे. This is also an interesting aspect of human behavior. Huh? I am asking you to write about the muddiest point. Some of you are writing the name Bajrang Punia. Huh? Now name sounds familiar to me, but I can't connect. पेपर में क्या आएगा रिलीवेंट नहीं है अभी. Will definitely, it's not going to be very difficult and very challenging if you are regular in the class and attend the class with all sincerity. Yeah, okay. But how is that relevant? See, that is the point. Name sounded familiar to me, but what is the relevance? Okay, so most of you are saying nothing. That is the key response that I see. Apart from that, psychophysics, yes, it is an effort to study the relationship between the sensory experience and our judgments of it. Then consciousness, of course, is a deep philosophical topic. We'll come back to it again. It cannot be explained, but maybe I think what we can see is that consciousness is as a topic has to be understood in its own right. It's philosophical as well as psychological. Okay, so Prayansh is asking, does actual data analysis tell us more about human behavior than just theories? See, theories and the empirical research are connected, intertwined with each other. You develop theories, theories help you make predictions. Why people are not wearing masks, even if their lives are in danger, it can be a research question. You may have a theory about behavior, human behavior. You use that theory to propose a hypothesis, and you test that hypothesis through an experiment or through another kind of a study, and then you test whether the hypothesis has worked or not, so that the theory get confirmed or disconfirmed, and you move ahead. You develop knowledge, you develop an understanding, and that is why an empirical approach tells you more, especially in these domains where things are quite fuzzy. It tells you more about what and gives you an evidence about how things really are, rather than relying on conjectures and assertions. So that is the key point here. So that actual data, not just data analysis, but what I'm saying is a scientific process of research. It tells us a lot about how mind works, and how we can use our understanding of mind to create a better world. And that is what the effort is all about, to create a better world. How do we, in a way, if we understand mind, if we understand behavior, imagine, so just let me give you one final example, although we are out of time. Just one final example. Look at the way New Zealand has handled a pandemic, and look at the way United States, United Kingdom, and India has handled pandemic. Why is the difference? You think about that. I'll leave you there. What Prayansh is again saying, for scientific researchers, you can't really replicate the real word or what? I don't understand. But yes, you see, again, even when you are studying, say, a physiological process in the laboratory, you are studying chemical compounds, you are studying physical matter and so on. It's not the real world. It's still a laboratory world, but laboratory world tell you a lot about how things function in the real world, and you can always get confirmation and disconfirmation through the ongoing process. So science, you have to understand, is an ongoing process of investigation. There is never a final point. You cannot say that we have solved the mystery of gravitation. Newton thought that I have solved the mystery of gravitation. Einstein came along the way, gave a radically different understanding of gravitation, which we subscribe to now. That's how science functions. Theory after theory, perspective after perspective. And that is why you looked at different schools of thought, because in different eras, different ways of thinking and doing psychology were prevalent, and that's how we shaped. And the same with science. It's same with the field that you are actually studying, maybe some branch of engineering or anything. You look at its history. The key point of this class is that unless you know history, you won't know its present, and that is what we need to do, to pay attention to the historical context. And in today, what we have covered is a broad kind of a spectrum of changes in psychology that have shaped, that have created what it is today, that have shaped its fundamental question, fundamental methods of inquiry, and also developed insights into human mind, human behavior, and so on. It's a growing, it's a kind of a very vibrant field right now, which is spread across the world. You won't find a country in the world where psychology is not studied. So people have come to realize the value of this knowledge in different ways. Okay, and more about this in the coming weeks. I hope you will explore the textbook, you will explore more material, but feel free to send your questions uh, to TAs, to us, and we'll be happy to answer, happy to help you. And I hope we'll have better discussion in the coming classes. Okay, you guys can leave now. Let's stop here.